What would you do if the woman you hired to fake a relationship for one night turned out to be the only person who ever truly saw you and made you wish it was all real? 500 for the dress. Another 500 for your company that evening, Miss Carter. Consider it an advance on your performance fee. The words floated through the yoga studio like a challenge wrapped in silk. Calm music played softly in the background, and the golden afternoon sun filtered through the glass windows. But the moment Alexander Vance spoke, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Nina Carter blinked, her spine straightened, not from alarm, but instinct. She stood there in her soft cotton tank top and leggings, grounded like a tree, while the man before her, clad in a sharply tailored navy suit and Italian leather shoes, disrupted the quiet balance of her studio with one outrageous proposition. She took a breath, steady and deep, just like she always told her students. "You're asking me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" Alexander Vance didn't flinch. "Just for one night. My sister's wedding. This Saturday." There was no arrogance in his voice, only precision. Controlled, practical. But behind his eyes, Nina sensed a storm of pressure he refused to acknowledge. "I see," Nina replied slowly, her voice calm but sharp. "So you walked into a yoga class and decided the instructor looked desperate enough to play girlfriend for $1,000. His jaw shifted slightly, a flash of discomfort cracking through his composed facade. "I wouldn't say desperate," he said. "I'd say discreet, normal, approachable. And most importantly, uninterested in making this complicated." Nina let out a short laugh. "You really know how to flatter a woman, Mr. Vance." Alexander had only attended her class a handful of times. He came late. He left early. But she remembered him because people like him weren't common in her world. Men who wore success like armor. Men who seemed to belong more in boardrooms and magazine covers than meditation circles. Now that same man was standing in the center of her studio, offering her money to save him from the judgment of relatives and social expectations. He noticed her hesitation and softened his tone. "Look, I'm not asking you to do anything you're uncomfortable with. Just stand beside me, smile, make polite conversation. No drama, no expectations, just a bit of make-believe so my mother and sister stop trying to set me up with their college roommates' daughters." Nina crossed her arms. "Why me?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the serene space around them, the soft lighting, the folded mats, the smell of lavender and eucalyptus. Then finally he said, "Because you seem like the kind of person who doesn't care what people like me do for a living. And right now, that's exactly what I need." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nina looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the designer suit and perfectly styled hair, he looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. Like a man who had built a world of logic and success, only to find it hollow in places that mattered. "I'm not an actress," Nina said at last. "You don't have to be," he replied. "Just be yourself. That's all I'm asking." She considered the offer. She had been saving for an advanced yoga training retreat in Bali for over a year. She still needed about $1,000. It wasn't just the money, though. There was something oddly thrilling about stepping into a world so different from hers. And there was something about the way he asked, equal parts awkward and earnest, that made her believe he wasn't playing games. "Fine," Nina said. "But I have one condition." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "There will be boundaries, clear ones. No handsy acting, no flirting beyond surface-level conversation. And if anyone asks how we met, you follow my lead." He nodded. "Agreed." "And," she added, "I do my own hair and makeup." A corner of his mouth twitched upward. "That's probably for the best." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is the strangest thing anyone has ever asked me to do." "It's the strangest thing I've ever asked," he admitted. They exchanged numbers. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. By the time Alexander left the studio, the room felt calm again, but Nina's world had shifted slightly. She stood at the door a moment longer, staring out at the street. What had she just agreed to? Alexander Vance wasn't the type of man who flinched under pressure. He built innovate solutions from a cramped garage in East Austin into a tech giant worth billions. He negotiated with investors twice his age, outmaneuvered corporate sharks, and never backed down from a challenge. But there was one battlefield where Alexander never won. His family, especially his younger sister Sloane. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when his phone buzzed on the polished walnut desk of his 27th floor office. He had been sketching wireframes for a new AI interface, fully immersed, zoned in, when the screen lit up. Sloane Vance. Incoming call. He sighed. She only called when she wanted something, or worse, when she wanted him to want something. "Hey, Liv," he answered, using her childhood nickname. "Jules, sweetie." Her voice was bright, too bright. "You do remember what next weekend is, right?" Alexander leaned back in his chair. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him overlooked the shimmering towers of downtown Austin. "I've got it marked. Red ink, top of the calendar. Your wedding." "Good," she replied, but there was a pause. The kind that came before a request or an ambush. "Tell me you're not showing up alone." Again. There it was. Alexander closed his eyes. "Sloane." "No." "Absolutely not," she cut in. "I've already told Aunt Miriam, Aunt Lucy, and basically the entire mum squad that you're bringing your girlfriend this time. Don't make me look like a liar." "Why would you tell them that?" "Because they're worried about you," she said, exasperated. "You work too much. You never date. People are starting to wonder if you're emotionally defective." He laughed, dry and short. "That's dramatic, even for you." "And what about Mom?" Sloane pushed on. "She's been praying, literally praying, that you'll find someone and settle down before your 40th birthday. Don't you think you owe her at least the illusion that you're human?" Alexander rubbed his temples. Their mother, Eleanor Vance, was the epitome of high society grace. Always composed, always calculating. But beneath that, she was a mother who wanted her children to be happy, or at least to appear so in front of their equally accomplished friends. And Alexander, despite his success, was still her greatest mystery. A man who could conquer the business world, but had yet to bring a woman home for more than an awkward brunch. Sloane's voice broke through his thoughts again. "Also, I may have accidentally invited some of your exes. Just a few." He groaned. "You what? They're all married or engaged now, so no threat. I just thought maybe seeing them all would light a fire under you." "You think this is a game?" he asked, his tone sharper now. "I think," she said gently, "you're lonely. And you won't admit it. And I don't want your entire life to be quarterly reports and boardroom battles." He didn't have a response for that. The truth, if he was being honest with himself, was more complicated. He had dated models, consultants, women who understood his world, but none of them lasted. They wanted the lifestyle, not the man beneath it, or they tried to change him, or they couldn't handle the pace of his work. Eventually, it just became easier to stay alone. Until now. He ended the call with a vague promise. "I'll handle it." But once the line went dead, the weight settled in his chest like a stone. He stared out the window at the skyline he had once dreamed of dominating. Now at 37, he'd done it all. Built an empire, bought penthouses, flown first class to anywhere he pleased. But he couldn't find one woman to sit beside him at a wedding? It was ridiculous. And yet, he understood. His family didn't want perfection. They wanted proof that he could love, that he wasn't just a machine. And so, in a moment of rare impulsiveness, He pulled up the website of a small yoga studio just a few blocks from his office. He remembered it clearly, sunlight streaming in, eucalyptus in the air, and a woman at the front of the room with a calm voice and a kind face. Nina Carter. She had barely looked at him during the classes. She hadn't asked about his company. She hadn't flirted. She was safe, grounded, real. Exactly what he needed. Nina Carter stared at her phone long after the call ended. The man who had just offered her $1,000 to pretend to be his girlfriend for one night was, by every measure, out of her league. Not just financially. Alexander Vance lived in a world of penthouses and press releases, while she taught yoga in a sunlit room above a vegan bakery. And yet, she had said yes. Sort of. "I'll do it," she had told him. "But there are rules." He had agreed, instantly, almost too quickly, like someone drowning and grabbing the first lifeline they could find. Nina couldn't tell whether that made him pathetic or human, maybe a little of both. Now, 2 days later, she stood in front of the full-length mirror in her apartment, holding up a dress she hadn't touched in years. It was deep cobalt blue, the kind of shade that made her eyes pop and her skin glow. Off the shoulder, gently fitted at the waist, silk that slid between her fingers like water. She had bought it once for a gala she never attended, back when she was still dating a banker who told her she cleaned up nicely. She never wore it again after they broke up. But something about this moment made her pull it from the closet and smooth out the wrinkles like she was ironing out pieces of her past. That Saturday, at exactly 3 o'clock, Alexander's sleek grey Tesla pulled up to her apartment building in the South Congress District. He rang the bell with military precision, clearly expecting to take her shopping. But when Nina opened the door, she greeted him with a warm smile and a small shake of her head. "No need for a shopping trip, Mr. Vance. I have the dress, I've done my hair, and I've applied my own makeup, light, natural, and appropriate. I'm ready." Alexander looked her over, not with judgment, but with surprise. He had expected a loose cotton sundress, maybe something bohemian, not this. She wore jeans, a fitted blouse, and her hair tied back casually. But the confidence in her voice told him one thing loud and clear: she wasn't going to be his little project for the day. He nodded. "All right then. I'll pick you up again at 6. The reception starts at 7 sharp. 6 it is," she said, then paused. "And Alexander?" He turned. "I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I can hold a conversation. I can smile for photos. But I won't become some fantasy woman for your mother or sister." His expression was unreadable for a second, then softened. "Honestly, Nina, that's exactly why I chose you." At 5:59 p.m. he was back. He stood at her doorstep, fixing his cufflinks, his jaw tight with the kind of nervous tension he would deny if asked. He had closed million-dollar deals, given keynote speeches in front of thousands, but tonight he was anxious. And then she opened the door. For a full 3 seconds, Alexander forgot how to breathe. Nina Carter, simple, quiet, down-to-earth Nina, stood before him in the cobalt blue gown that shimmered like twilight. Her hair was down, soft waves cascading over her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle, just enough to highlight her eyes and cheekbones. She wore small pearl earrings and a silver chain around her neck. She looked breathtaking. Not in a flashy, overdone way, but in the kind of way that made you pause, take a step back, and realize you'd been wrong about someone. "Miss Carter," he said, recovering his voice, "you look stunning." Nina gave him a small, knowing smile. "Thank you. I bought this dress years ago, but never had the right occasion to wear it." "Well," he said, still staring, "this is more than suitable." He opened the car door for her. For the first few minutes of the drive, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, but it wasn't quite comfortable either. It was expectant, like the calm before a performance. As they neared the venue, An elegant lakeside resort, glittering with fairy lights and the buzz of high society. Alexander finally broke the silence. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Nina glanced at him. "About pretending to be your girlfriend in front of a bunch of judgmental strangers?" "A little." He gave a faint smile. "They're not all judgmental." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean some of them are just nosy?" He chuckled, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him. It made him look younger, softer. "I promise," he said. "We'll keep it simple. Just smile, nod, and if anyone asks how we met, say, at a charity fundraiser for mental health." "I teach yoga, remember?" she replied. "It actually fits." And he added, "If anyone gets too nosy, I'll pull you away." Nina nodded. "Good. Because if someone asks what I do for a living and then laughs about downward dog, I'm not responsible for what happens." Alexander smiled again. "Deal." As they approached the valley, Nina took a deep breath. It wasn't just about walking into a wedding with a fake boyfriend. It was walking into a world that wasn't hers, a world that often judged by labels, salaries, and designer shoes. But she wasn't going to shrink. Not tonight. The lakeside resort looked like something pulled straight from a bridal magazine. Crystal lights hung in cascades from the ancient oaks. White roses lined every path, and a live quartet played soft jazz by the water's edge. It was elegance, perfection, and pressure all rolled into one. Alexander Vance stepped out of his Tesla, buttoned his jacket, and moved to the passenger side. When Nina Carter stepped out, he could feel the air change. She wasn't loud. She didn't wave or laugh dramatically, but the simple way she carried herself, graceful, poised, calm, drew attention like gravity. Heads turned. Conversation paused mid-sentence. Even the valet took a half-step back, unsure if he was looking at a guest or a celebrity. Alexander offered her his arm. "Ready?" Nina took it with a soft smile. "You tell me. Am I playing the part right?" He glanced at her. "You're not playing a part at all." Inside, the reception was in full swing. Guests filled the ballroom with bright dresses and tailored tuxedos, champagne flutes in hand. A chandelier glittered above like starlight. The Caldwell-Whitaker wedding was already the event of the season. When Alexander and Nina entered, all eyes turned their way. But this wasn't the reaction he was used to. He was often the center of attention, the billionaire, the reclusive genius. But tonight it wasn't about him. It was about her. Nina, with her quiet elegance and serene smile, lit up the room without trying. She didn't cling to his arm or overdo her performance. She greeted people politely, laughed softly when appropriate, and made everyone she spoke to feel like they mattered. His sister Sloane nearly dropped her champagne. "Alex," she whispered, grabbing his elbow, "is that Nina?" He nodded. "Yes, Nina Carter." Sloane's eyes went wide. She's gorgeous. And smart. I mean, she just talked to Aunt Miriam about meditation and completely calmed her down. No one calms Aunt Miriam. Alexander smirked. "She's full of surprises." Their mother, Eleanor Vance, approached next. Regal as ever in an emerald gown, she held Nina's hands in hers. "Well, my dear," Eleanor said with a warm smile, "I was prepared to meet someone polished, but I wasn't expecting someone so substantial." "You're lovely, Nina." "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," Nina replied. "And thank you for raising such a thoughtful son." Eleanor's brow lifted slightly, a mix of surprise and approval. "He's many things. Thoughtful isn't always one of them." Alexander cleared his throat. "Mother." But Eleanor laughed. "I like her, Alex." That sentence echoed in his mind long after she walked away. The night unfolded like a well-written script. Nina navigated conversation with professors, executives, and Sloane's old college friends without missing a beat. She discussed literature with a retired English teacher, talked AI ethics with one of Alexander's board members, shared yoga tips with a woman complaining about back pain, and all the while, she made Alexander look better. Not in a polished, PR-friendly way, but in a human way. He didn't need to force a smile or defend his life choices. With Nina beside him, he felt lighter, grounded, seen. And something about that terrified him. During the dinner, seated at a candlelit table near the dance floor, Nina leaned closer. "So far, so good." Alexander studied her for a long second. "You're exceptional." She tilted her head. "That's a CEO compliment if I've ever heard one." "No," he said softly. "That's a man trying to find words and failing." Nina laughed gently, then turned her attention to the dance floor where couples began to waltz. The band played a slow, sweeping melody, old-fashioned, romantic. "Don't look now," she whispered, "but your mom is watching us." Alexander followed her gaze. Sure enough, Eleanor sat across the room, champagne glass in hand, eyes fixed on them. Without thinking, Alexander reached for Nina's hand. "Would you dance with me?" She blinked. "Right now? No better time." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Vance. Let's sell the fantasy." They moved onto the floor. His hand found the small of her back. Hers rested lightly on his shoulder. As they began to move, something shifted. The room, the noise, the expectations, all of it faded. All that remained was her warm skin through silk, the scent of jasmine in her hair, and the soft rhythm of her breath matching his. She looked up at him. "You're not half bad." "I had a good teacher," he said. They moved in sync, effortlessly. And in that moment, Alexander forgot they were pretending. He forgot the deal, the rules, the money. All he saw was her, Nina. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man. As the music slowed, they lingered for a moment too long before pulling apart. Back at their table, Sloane grinned at them from across the room. Her eyes sparkled with suspicion and amusement. "She knows something's up," Nina said. "Let her wonder," Alexander replied, but deep down, he was wondering too. How had this woman, this calm, grounded yoga teacher, stepped into his world and turned everything upside down? It wasn't just admiration anymore. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something else. Something dangerously close to real. The reception stretched into the evening, but Alexander Vance barely noticed the passing time. He was too focused on the woman beside him, Nina Carter, still pretending. Still playing a part, at least that's what they'd agreed, but the way she gently rested her hand on his arm as they walked, the way her laughter felt like sunlight slipping through stained glass, the way she leaned in to whisper something witty in his ear while Sloane's friends tried to quiz her on her real job, none of that felt rehearsed. It felt real. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. At one point, as they walked past the dessert table, an older woman in pearls and a pastel shawl stepped into their path. "Mr. Vance," she purred, "I was just telling my niece over there how wonderful it is to finally meet the woman who tamed the infamous Alexander." Nina smiled graciously. "Well, I wouldn't say tamed. More like convinced him to slow down every now and then." The woman giggled. "A miracle, if you ask me." As they moved away, Alexander leaned closer. "That was smooth." Nina didn't look at him. "I've had years of experience deflecting judgmental curiosity with charm. Yoga moms can be vicious." He laughed, genuinely. They circled the room, pausing for small conversations, polite introductions. But with every laugh, every passing glance, something kept tugging at him. It wasn't just her beauty, though tonight she was undeniably radiant. It was her composure, her ease, the way she made him feel less like a polished product and more like a person. There was a moment, just past 9, when they found themselves alone on the veranda outside the ballroom. The cool air kissed their skin, carrying the scent of roses and lake water. The music from inside drifted softly through the glass. Nina leaned on the railing, gazing out at the shimmering surface of the lake. Alexander stood beside her, hands in his pockets. For once, he didn't feel the need to fill the silence. "You know," she said finally, "this whole night has gone surprisingly well. Why does that sound like you expected it to be a disaster?" "I didn't expect anything," Nina replied, her voice soft. "But pretending to be someone's partner in front of a room full of strangers? That's usually where things get awkward." He looked at her. "But it hasn't." "No," she said, turning to face him. "It hasn't." Their eyes locked. A few beats of silence passed. And then, without thinking, Alexander reached up and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. A gentle touch. Simple. But it sparked something electric. Nina blinked. "Careful, Mr. Vance. That wasn't in the contract." His hand dropped immediately. "Sorry." She smiled. "I didn't say I minded." The words hung between them, fragile and unspoken, a possibility neither of them had planned for. Back inside, Sloane gave her speech. There were tears and laughter, jokes about growing up with an older brother who thought coding was cooler than dating. Alexander chuckled on cue, but his hand stayed close to Nina's. Not touching, just near enough to feel her presence. As the dancing resumed, Nina pulled him to the side. "You've been on your feet all night. Let's sit." They found a quiet corner, 2 champagne flutes in hand. Nina removed her heels with a sigh of relief and tucked her legs beneath her on the cushioned bench. "You're barefoot at a millionaire wedding," Alexander teased. "I'm still getting paid, aren't I?" He laughed, shaking his head. Then she looked at him, really looked. "What about you?" He frowned. "What about me?" "Are you okay?" The question caught him off guard. People rarely asked that. And if they did, it was usually out of formality, not care. "I'm fine," he said automatically. Then paused. I guess I'm surprised by how much I'm enjoying tonight." She tilted her head. "Because of the catering." "Or the fake girlfriend?" "Mostly the fake girlfriend," he said, his voice quieter. Another pause. "You're not what I expected," he added. Nina smiled. "You either." Later that night, the band struck up a final slow number. Guests had started to leave, the dance floor thinned, and the sky outside turned to velvet. Alexander stood, offering his hand. "One more?" Nina looked up, unsure. "You're not tired of pretending?" His voice was steady. "I'm not pretending anymore." Her breath caught, just for a second, before she took his hand and rose. They danced in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time words weren't necessary. The music swelled, the lights dimmed, and somewhere between the first step and the last turn, something in both of them shifted. It wasn't part of the deal, it wasn't in the script. But it was real, and neither of them could deny it anymore. The wedding was over. The music had faded. The champagne had gone flat. The roses, once pristine, now wilted slightly under the weight of candle wax and conversation. The photographers packed up, the waitstaff cleared plates with clockwork precision, and guests filtered out with hugs, tired smiles, and slightly wobbly steps. But Alexander Vance lingered. So did Nina Carter. They stood at the edge of the ballroom near the coat check, where their night began. The same room, but everything felt different now. The air was heavier, the energy softer, and something unspoken had settled between them, warm, fragile, and real. Alexander helped Nina with her shawl. "Let me drive you home," he said. "You don't have to," she replied gently. "I want to." The ride was quiet at first. Alexander's Tesla glided through the late-night streets of Austin, past darkened cafes and silent storefronts. City lights flickered on the windshield, casting a soft glow across Nina's face. She had removed her earrings, her shoes tucked neatly by her feet. The cobalt blue gown still shimmered under the streetlights, but she looked human now. Tired, beautiful, real. "Thank you," he said suddenly. She turned. "For what? For tonight? For saying yes? For being everything?" Nina smiled faintly. "You're not a man who says thank you easily." "I'm learning," he replied. She glanced out the window, watching the world blur by. "I have to admit, I wasn't expecting tonight to feel like this." "Neither was I. I thought I'd feel out of place." "But your family, they were kind." He nodded. "You won them over." She chuckled. Maybe they were just relieved you finally brought someone who wasn't obsessed with your net worth." He smiled at that. "You were the only one in the room who didn't ask me what I did for a living." "I already knew," she replied. "I just didn't care." That answer landed in his chest like a soft punch. When they reached her apartment building, Alexander pulled up to the curb and shifted the car into park. The engine fell silent, but neither of them moved. Nina reached for the door handle. "Well, wait," he said, before he could stop himself. She paused, hand still on the handle. I don't want the night to end here." Nina looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Alexander," we agreed. "I know, one night, one role, one paycheck." He took a breath. But tonight didn't feel like acting. A silence hung between them. Not heavy, not tense, just fragile. "I'm not trying to complicate things," he added, "but I want to see you again. For real." "No more pretending." Nina lowered her eyes, fingers twisting the strap of her clutch. "This is unexpected," she said quietly. "You're a billionaire tech CEO. I teach yoga and live above a bookstore. We don't exactly fit on paper. I don't care about paper." "I do," she whispered, "because it's always the paper that gets waved in your face when things fall apart." Alexander didn't push. He just waited. Finally, she met his gaze again. "Let me think about it." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." Then, softening, she added, "But if you're free tomorrow morning, there's a little cafe down the street. They have the best cinnamon rolls in South Austin." He smiled, hopeful. "Are you inviting me?" "I'm suggesting a debrief." "You know, for the sake of the project." He chuckled. "Of course. Very professional." 10 a.m., she said, already stepping out of the car. "Nina," she paused, halfway out the door. "You looked stunning tonight," he said. "But more than that, you made me feel like myself." She blinked, surprised by the sincerity. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night." He watched her walk up the steps, heels in hand, dress flowing behind her like a whispered memory. She didn't look back, but he hoped she would be there tomorrow. The next morning, Alexander stood in front of the cafe at 9:45. No suit, no driver, just him in jeans and a button-down, his hands in his pockets, looking strangely out of place and yet entirely human. When Nina arrived in sneakers and a loose-knit sweater, her hair in a bun, he felt that same unexpected flutter in his chest. She smiled at him. "You're early." "I didn't sleep much." "Me either," she said softly. They stepped inside, found a quiet booth in the corner, and ordered 2 coffees and just one, cinnamon roll to share. As they sat, Alexander leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked with hers. "No scripts today," he said. "No performances," she agreed. "Just us. Just us." And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. They met again the following Wednesday. It wasn't planned like before. There was no contract, no money exchanged, no timelines to follow. Just Alexander texting Nina, asking if she wanted to walk with him at Zilka Park before sunset. She said yes. He showed up in sneakers and a grey hoodie, still crisp and impossibly clean, but undeniably casual. Nina wore leggings and a denim jacket, her hair in a loose ponytail, She brought 2 bottles of water and a bag of trail mix. For the first 10 minutes, they walked in silence. Not because they didn't have things to say, but because the quiet between them had become comfortable. The pressure was gone. The performance was over. Now it was about something neither of them could define just yet, but both of them felt. "So," Nina said, finally breaking the silence, "how does a tech CEO spend his time when he's not running an empire?" Alexander shrugged. "Lately, rethinking everything." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dramatic." "It is," he admitted with a laugh. "But true. I've spent so many years building things, apps, systems, infrastructure. I never stopped to think about the life I was building around it. And now?" "Now," he said, looking at her, "I'm wondering what it would look like to build something slower, something simpler. Maybe even something real." Nina's heart did a small, unexpected flip. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other often, not at galas, not at 5-star restaurants. They met at farmers' markets, where Nina taught him how to pick a ripe avocado without bruising it. They sat on park benches, eating street tacos and talking about childhood dreams. They spent Sunday mornings drinking coffee on her tiny apartment balcony while the city hummed quietly below. Alexander learned to relax. He stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes. He let emails go unanswered for hours. He even cancelled a board meeting once just to attend Nina's community yoga class in the park. She didn't ask him to, but he showed up anyway. And when she introduced him to the group as just a friend, he didn't correct her. He sat on a mat like everyone else, did his best version of Downward Dog, and smiled every time she looked his way. One evening, they stood in Nina's kitchen chopping vegetables for a stir-fry. Alexander was terrible with a knife. Nina gently took his hand and showed him how to curl his fingers so he wouldn't cut himself. Their hands lingered longer than necessary. "You really don't cook?" she asked. "I usually order in," he replied. "Of course you do. But this is better," she smiled. "You're not just saying that because you're trying to impress me." He leaned closer. "Is it working?" She laughed. "Maybe." The timer dinged. Dinner was ready. They ate cross-legged on her living room floor, watching an old documentary on the healing power of touch. Nina talked about the human nervous system. Alexander listened like every word mattered, because it did. Their lives were wildly different. She biked to work. He had a private driver. She shopped at second-hand bookstores. He donated to literacy foundations. She made $42,000 a year. He made more than that in a single morning. But none of it seemed to matter when they were together. They found common ground in unlikely places. Their shared love of old jazz records, their mutual dislike of social media, their strange obsession with crossword puzzles. Alexander once spent 2 hours helping Nina build a bookshelf for her studio, and though his hands were more familiar with a stylus than a screwdriver, he didn't complain once. Nina, in turn, visited his world in small, careful steps. She joined him at a private tech summit, just as a guest. She asked smart questions, held her own in conversations, and left more than a few executives stunned by her insights into mental health and mindfulness. "She's different," one of his investors whispered that night. Alexander smiled. "Exactly. But it wasn't all perfect. There were moments of tension, like when one of his former flings ran into them at a coffee shop and gave Nina a once-over that made her stomach turn, or when Alexander's assistant emailed her by accident, assuming Nina was a publicist. And then there was the charity gala invitation. $10,000 a plate, black tie, red carpet. Nina hesitated. "Do I really belong in that world?" she asked him. He took her hand. "You belong anywhere you want to be. But you don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to them." She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. So she went, wearing a simple black gown. No stylist, no glam squad, just Nina. And once again, she didn't have to try to shine. She just did. One night, after weeks of shared mornings and slow afternoons, Alexander walked her home. They stood at the door to her building, the same one where they had ended their fake night together. But this time, it felt different. "I like this," he said. "All of it. You. Us." Nina searched his face. "Even when I burned the tofu?" "Especially then." She laughed, then paused. "Are you sure this isn't just another project for you? Something you're building like everything else?" "No," he said, brushing her cheek gently with his thumb. "This isn't something I'm building." He smiled softly. "This is something I'm falling into." She didn't say anything right away. She just pulled him into a kiss. And for once in his life, Alexander Vance didn't feel like a CEO, a brand, or a headline. He just felt whole. The Vance Foundation's annual charity gala was always an event of whispered reputations and curated appearances. The room buzzed with polished elegance, gowns worth thousands, champagne poured without asking, and conversations that felt more like chess matches than connection. Nina Carter stood at the edge of it all in a sleek midnight blue dress she had borrowed from a friend. Her hair was styled simply. Her jewelry was modest, but her posture was calm, her eyes steady. She didn't fit in. Not really, but she wasn't trying to. Alexander had told her she didn't need to impress anyone. Still, walking into a ballroom where everyone knew who he was and had no idea what to make of her was a different story. They had been together for 3 months now, officially, openly. And although Nina never asked for labels, Alexander made it clear to everyone who she was, his partner, the woman he cared for. But tonight, the lines between his world and hers would be tested. They had just finished speaking with the mayor of Austin when a woman approached. Statuesque, polished, with diamond earrings that could pay off Nina's student loans, Brielle Whitaker, cousin of Grant Whitaker, Sloane's husband. And the kind of person who could compliment you while cutting you down in the same breath. "Well, if it isn't Alexander," Brielle cooed, offering a kiss on the cheek. "And you must be Nina, right?" Nina extended her hand. "Nice to meet you." Brielle took it lightly, barely a shake. "I've heard so much about you." "Oh?" Nina asked. "Yes," Brielle said sweetly. "A yoga teacher, isn't that right? That must be so peaceful, a lovely break from the stress of real work." Nina blinked. She had heard this tone before, in locker rooms, in faculty lounges. People who didn't value what didn't pay 6 figures. She smiled. "It's actually very fulfilling. Teaching people how to breathe when they've forgotten how." Brielle gave a polite laugh. "How poetic." Then she turned to Alexander, looping her arm through his. "Darling, you know my daughter Emily just started working at Goldman. I should introduce you sometime. Bright, brilliant, more your speed, I'd imagine." Nina's breath caught. And for the first time, Alexander spoke, slowly, clearly, firmly. "Brielle," he said, gently removing her arm, "I'm not interested in your daughter. Or anyone else, for that matter." She blinked. "Oh, come now, I didn't mean—" He raised his hand, stopping her. "Let me be clear. Nina isn't just my date. She's the most grounded, intelligent woman I've ever known. She teaches people how to heal, how to reconnect with themselves. And frankly, that's more important than anything we're doing in this room tonight." Brielle's smile faltered. "I'm proud of who she is. I'm proud to be with her. And if that doesn't fit into your version of real work, that's your problem." The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. A few heads turned. Conversations paused. Nina stood beside him, her heart racing, her fingers cold, but her spine straightened. Alexander reached for her hand, not in performance, not out of obligation, but with quiet certainty. She held on. They stepped away from the circle toward the balcony. Outside, the air was cooler. "Softer." Nina exhaled. "You didn't have to say all that." "Yes, I did," he replied. "They're your world, Alexander." He shook his head. You're my world. She looked at him, eyes shining. That might have been the first time someone publicly stood up for me like that. I should have done it sooner. She leaned against the railing. You didn't hesitate. I never will again. There it was, the difference between affection and devotion, between being tolerated and being chosen. And she had just been chosen. Later that night, back in his penthouse, they sat on the balcony in silence. Her heels were off. His tie was undone. Nina rested her head on his shoulder. Do you regret it? She asked quietly, standing up to Brielle. No. Letting me into your world. He turned and kissed the top of her head. Letting you in is the only thing I've done right in years. She closed her eyes and let those words settle. There was no contract now. No rules, no timeline, just this, whatever it was becoming. And for the first time in her life, Nina felt seen. Not as someone from a simpler life, but as someone worthy of standing in any room. Because she wasn't standing there alone. It started like any other Saturday. Nina thought they were just going for a drive. Alexander had mentioned something vague about needing fresh air and no emails, and she didn't press him for details. She was happy to go anywhere with him, especially if it meant quiet roads, good coffee, and no dress code. They drove with the windows down, the warm Texas breeze tangled in her hair. The city fell away, mile by mile, until the skyline disappeared and fields of wildflowers stretched endlessly on both sides. It wasn't until Alexander turned onto a gravel road that she looked at him, slightly curious. Where are we going? He smiled, eyes on the horizon. You'll see. The car came to a stop in front of a wide, empty plot of land. Rolling green hills in the distance, a few mature oak trees casting shade across the soil, and nothing but birdsong in the air. Nina stepped out slowly, scanning the open space. It was beautiful. Peaceful, untouched. Okay, she said cautiously. You've officially kidnapped me to the middle of nowhere. Alexander laughed. Not quite. Come here. He led her a few steps forward, toward a wooden post driven into the ground. Attached was a laminated rendering, an architectural sketch. Nina tilted her head to read it, and then froze. It was a house. A modest, modern design with tall windows and a sloped roof. There was a spacious yoga studio in the back, facing a rock garden. A wraparound porch. A library nook, an outdoor meditation space under a pergola. She stared at it in disbelief. What is this? Alexander's voice was soft. This is what you described to me, that night on your balcony, remember? You said if you could build anything, it would be a quiet place where people could breathe again. Her hand flew to her mouth. I had an architect draft it, based on your words. Your sketches, your stories. She turned to him, heart racing. But why? Because you've spent your life giving peace to others, he said, stepping closer. You've helped me slow down, see differently, breathe again. I wanted to give something back, not just gifts or vacations, but a place, a future. One that starts with you. Tears welled in Nina's eyes before she could stop them. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just tell me if this feels right. She looked out over the land again, imagining the garden, the studio, the sound of wind chimes in the trees. It didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like home. But this is your money, she whispered. And your vision, he replied. I don't want to build something that looks good on paper. I want to build what matters. With you. They sat together on the hood of the car for a long time, legs dangling, her head resting on his shoulder. You know, she said after a while, you've changed. How so? When we met, you couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes without checking your watch. He smiled. And now? Now you just gave me land and a blueprint like it was a love letter. Because it is, he said softly. Just in my language. Nina turned to look at him. I love your language. The following week, they visited the architect together. They revised the plans, adding solar panels, a herb garden, and a reading loft with a skylight. Nina's eyes sparkled the whole time. She wasn't used to having her voice valued like this. Her ideas weren't just tolerated, they were wanted. Alexander, for his part, listened more than he spoke. He asked questions, took notes, let her lead. And with every passing day, the gap between their worlds felt smaller, not because their lives had become the same, but because they were choosing to build something together. Something new, something entirely theirs. One evening, they returned to the plot of land just before sunset. Nina stepped out of the car barefoot, toes sinking into the grass. The golden light painted everything in honey. Alexander followed, holding a small velvet box in his hand. She didn't notice at first, not until he walked to the same wooden post, knelt down beneath the blueprint, and looked up at her. The box was cobalt blue, just like the dress she wore the night they met. Nina froze. I once hired you to be my fake girlfriend, he said. And it was the craziest, most ridiculous thing I've ever done. She laughed through a tear. That's saying something. But somehow, he continued, that night showed me the person I didn't know I was missing. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate sapphire ring surrounded by tiny diamonds, like stars around a moon. You brought light into my life. You made it quieter, calmer, and infinitely more meaningful. I want to wake up beside you, build with you, dream with you. He took a breath. Will you marry me, Nina Carter? She covered her mouth, knees nearly buckling. Then, without hesitation, she nodded. Yes. Yes, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. And as they embraced under the fading Texas sun, surrounded by wildflowers and future dreams, neither of them needed anything more. The contract was long gone, but the commitment, that was just beginning. They didn't choose a cathedral or a five-star resort. They didn't send out embossed invitations or commission a celebrity florist. Instead, Alexander and Nina got married beneath the oak trees. It was a small ceremony, just close friends, family, and a sky full of golden afternoon light. The same piece of land where Alexander had first shown Nina the blueprint for her dream. The same place where he had knelt in the grass, holding a sapphire ring. Now that dream was beginning, not on paper, but in real life. Nina wore a simple ivory dress, soft and flowing, with a flower tucked behind her ear. Her bare feet brushed the grass as she walked toward him. Alexander stood in a light grey suit with no tie, hands trembling just slightly, the only sign of nerves in a man who once faced billion-dollar deals with ease. But this wasn't business. This was real, and it was everything he'd never dared to want. The ceremony was short, heartfelt. No grand gestures, no overly scripted vows, just two people looking into each other's eyes, speaking the words they had carried silently for months. I promise to never rush through a moment with you, Alexander said, to listen, to learn, to love you in the quiet and the chaos. Nina took his hand, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I promise to see you, not as the world sees you, but as the man who lets me be exactly who I am, who chooses peace when he could have noise, who chose me when he didn't have to. They sealed their vows with a kiss that was soft and unhurried, a kiss that didn't need to impress anyone. It simply belonged. And just like that, they were no longer Nina Carter and Alexander Vance, the yoga teacher and the tech CEO. They were husband and wife. The reception was held under a white tent lit by strings of warm lights. There were no assigned seats, no waitstaff in tuxedos, just potluck dishes from friends, a playlist Nina had put together herself, and laughter that echoed across the open field. Sloane gave a toast. You all know I like to meddle, she began, grinning. I mean, technically, this all started because I forced my brother to bring a date to my wedding. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But what I didn't expect, she continued, was that his fake date would be the realest woman I've ever met. Nina, thank you for being the calm to his storm. And Alex, thank you for finally proving that miracles do exist. Eleanor Vance, ever poised, clinked her glass and added, I never imagined my son would find love like this, but I thank God every day that he did. Nina's eyes welled up. Not because of the praise, but because she felt it, truly, for the first time. She was no longer an outsider. She belonged. Later that night, Alexander pulled her aside. They stood beneath the same oak tree where they had shared their first real kiss. The music from the tent played faintly in the background. The moonlight dusted the tops of the hills like powdered sugar. You happy? He asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I've never been more, she said. You're not worried? About what? That this is too different from where we came from. Too simple, too quiet. She smiled. Alexander, I used to think love had to be loud to be real, grand, impressive. But now I know, the quiet kind, the kind that grows slowly, with steady hands and good soil, that's the kind that lasts. He kissed her forehead, and they stood there, wrapped in the stillness of everything they had built, not overnight, not for show, but for keeps. Months passed. The house was finished that fall. The yoga studio opened with a small blessing ceremony. Locals came, curious at first, a tech billionaire building a meditation space. But when they saw the way Nina led with warmth and honesty, they stayed. And when they saw the way Alexander showed up, carrying mats, brewing tea, sitting in the back row without needing to be seen, they understood. He had found something worth more than any IPO. He had found peace. Sometimes people still ask them how they met. Nina would smile. He hired me. Alexander would grin. Best money I ever spent. But the truth was simpler. They met at the intersection of timing and need, of ambition and calm, of pretending and then choosing not to. They built a love that wasn't flashy or headline-worthy, but deeply felt, honest, whole. And every morning, when Nina stepped into the sunlight of her own studio, and Alexander handed her coffee with that same quiet look of devotion, she knew. She hadn't just married a man, she had married her future. Life lesson from a love that was never meant to be, but was sometimes. The most meaningful connections come not from perfect planning, but from unexpected choices. Alexander Vance thought he was solving a problem by hiring a stranger to play the part of a girlfriend. But what he found was someone who saw beyond his wealth, into the man he had forgotten to be. And Nina Carter, a quiet yoga teacher, stepped into a world that wasn't hers, not to impress, but simply to be herself. In doing so, she reminded everyone watching that authenticity still has power. For older adults, navigating a world that often feels rushed and image-obsessed, this story offers a gentle reminder. Real love doesn't shout. It shows up. It listens. It builds. The deepest partnerships aren't about grandeur or status, but about mutual respect, shared peace, and choosing each other again and again, even when no one is watching. Whether you're starting over, slowing down, or simply seeking connection, it's never too late to find a love that feels like home. Sometimes, the person meant for you shows up when you stop pretending and start living truthfully.